You're listening to the Ward Weekly Podcast with our host, Walter Latham, and our co-host, Michelle Sweeney McCombs. Voices in Society Impacting the Culture.
Hello all, and thank you for joining another episode of the Ward Weekly Live, our live cast. And that was coined by Michelle Sweeney McCombs. And I am your host, Walter Latham, along with Michelle Sweeney McCombs. And thank you guys for joining again. Please like, share, and follow. Above all, follow. Tell your friends about us. And we are here every Friday at 6 p.m. I was getting ready to say between 6 and 7. Sometimes we go over 7. All right. Do you guys realize that we are coming up on 1 year of COVID? I think the first case was last year, this month. The 1 year anniversary of the first case. Oh, and wow. I remember last year when I went to the gym, and I was going to the gym every day. I did legs one day and I did upper body the next. So I remember sitting, and it was sometime mid-March. I was sitting in the gym parking lot preparing to go in. And then I started thinking, should I go in this place or not? Because, I'm over 65. So, back then, the older you were, the more susceptible you were to getting the disease. So I was sitting there, then I said, no, hell no, I'm not going there. Maybe these cars I see parked, those are young people. So that just goes to show you how time went by so fast and how fortunate I am that I haven't gotten it yet. But, I still got my guard at 100%, and I hope y'all guys got your guard at 100% until y'all guys get the COVID vaccine. And I do remember a few weeks ago that I was supposed to be the sacrificial lamb of being the first one to get the COVID shot, because my colleagues here saying that, I'm going to wait, you go ahead first. But our panelist, Greg, I understand has gotten the COVID shot.
Yes,
so Greg has gotten it. So, he took one for the team, Greg.
Took one for the team. Thank you for that.
I figured I might as well.
Yeah.
All right, anyway. All right, without further ado, our topic today is, which is very, very serious, is domestic violence in the time of COVID. And, that's what we're going to talk about and discuss today, to raise awareness for those people that may have forgotten that we do have this plague, and that's been with us since the beginning of, people being married, I guess, thousands of years. But anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle so that she
said thousands of years.
Yeah, thousands of years. Yeah, definitely the caveman. You see those commercials, But
right.
Anyway.
All right. I hear you.
Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to you, Michelle, all right, to bring us in and introduce our panel.
All right. Okay, thanks, Walter, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ward Weekly Friday Live, sponsored by Beauty Blends by Ami, Soap and Love, and Michelle Sweeney here. Our intro and outro music is provided by Uncle Nephew and BD3. Thank you, everyone in the audience. We appreciate all your input in our chat room. Today's Friday Live topic is domestic violence and COVID. But of course, before that as well, domestic violence has always existed before COVID. We have a returning panel guest, Donna Hairston, diva with depression, out of Charlotte, North Carolina. We also have another special guest, Dory, out of New York City. And we have our panel guest, Ernest J. Robinson, out of North Carolina. out of D.C. We have Gregory Coleman out of North Carolina. We have Christopher Sweeney, who will be joining in out of New Jersey. Monique Lauderdale out of New York City. And who did I forget, guys? I'm all over the place. And Harper Milo will be joining in as well. Thank you, guys. I will put everyone's social media and websites in the chat room. So welcome. Dee, would you like to introduce yourself real quick for us?
Good evening, everybody. I am Dee Dee Hairston, the diva with depression. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining. We have also Harp that just got on live. He's an NYPD police officer. Who's that extra person that's on the call, please?
That's me.
Oh, okay. All right, honey. Sorry, Monique. I didn't recognize it. You didn't change your title. Cool.
No,
Okay.
I'm on my iPad instead of my phone because my phone is not connecting.
Awesome. We also have Dory out of New York City. She's also a someone that will privately give some of her story in reference to domestic violence. So we appreciate everybody coming in. Like I said, I will post in the chat room everyone's information, and I appreciate you guys joining us for this delicate topic, which is not spoken about a lot. So. All right, I'll start it up. Domestic violence has plagued us forever. There have been laws put in place to reduce and or stop this violence. What are your thoughts on the following acts? Hitting your spouse, verbally abusing your spouse, rape of your spouse, sodomizing your members of your family. Can we start with Donna?
Domestic violence has always been thought of as just a physical abuse, but we have to start including financial abuse. We have to start including emotional abuse. All of these things take place in a domestic violence situation.
Right.
No one should be hitting each other, whether it's man to woman or woman to man or children.
Right.
Keep your hands to yourself and try to work it out a different way. Verbal
Right.
abuse can be just as serious as physical abuse. I read a meme that said that you can heal scars, but you can't heal what you heard and what you feel. So we have to take the time to include all of those.
Right. I appreciate that. Dory, do you have anything you want to add to that, or do you need me to ask the question again?
Hello, I'm sorry. I had to unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes. We can hear you now.
Okay.
Yes.
Just that I wanted to agree the domestic violence isn't only happening during the pandemic, it's an everyday struggle.
Right.
And the emotional and mental abuse definitely can be more traumatic. Well, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say more, as traumatic as physical abuse.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's a broad question. We shouldn't have broken it down that way because each one of them holds a lot of weight. Hitting a spouse holds just as much weight as rape of your spouse. So, we should have, we should have just broken them out individually into, separate questions instead of doing the subs that we got there. But anyway, I think that the way Donna and Debbie handled it was right on point. So we're going to continue with, the rape of your spouse. What do y'all guys think about that? Is it possible to rape your spouse?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, we've heard of it. I mean, I don't know anyone that that has experienced it. No means no, exactly. Harp, can you give a little bit about that when it's raping a spouse and from the police side?
Definitely. You guys can hear me good, right?
Yes.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Well, good evening, everyone on the panel and everyone in the audience.
Good evening.
So basically, anyone, I don't care, spouse, mate, rape is rape. It doesn't have anything to do with marital status. So I don't want anyone thinking, whether in the audience or listening to this later on, that because they put that title to it, spousal rape, it has any less of a significance as opposed to being a stranger or a perpetrator. Rape is rape, and it's not acceptable in any form, whether it's a spouse or boyfriend or family member or anything.
Right.
So you don't make it from a legal standpoint in the laws. You would apply use the rape laws instead of domestic abuse laws. I think that's what I'm trying to. You understand what I'm trying to get at, Hart? Or is there?
I totally understand.
Yeah. What would the prosecutor go for? He would go for rape, and regardless of whether you're married or not. Rape is rape.
Again, rape is rape. But when they use the terminologies spousal, it's just to differentiate, as far as domestic violence goes, who the perpetrator is, for the law's purpose or court's purposes. But, that charge, rape is rape. So you don't get any more time or less time if you're related to the person.
All right. Anybody else want to comment on that, Ernest?
Yeah.
You're on mute. Can't hear you, Ernest. I'm not the only one.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah. One, I tend to agree with Hart was saying, but however, it is very much subjective in the penalty phase, unless there's a statute determined legally to where it carries a minimum of X number of years. That can definitely be a nuance throughout, depending on what jurisdiction is actually covering it, as far as how much time a person actually gets. But to the point is that it is illegal in all 50 states, no matter what the status is, as it pertains to rape. But it will be characterized or codified as marital rape if the couple happens to be married. But it is illegal in all 50 states.
Okay. All right. Greg, you want to add anything?
No, I mean, as far as, the legal ramifications, I mean, just there's no excuse for it. No matter, married, no, it comes down to mutual respect on either side. And when we're talking about, the rape of a spouse, that brings us back to, issues of domestic violence, like why that would take place. And that's what has to be addressed.
Okay. Before we go any further, we are having we're getting some feedback. So if you're not speaking, go on mute, please.
Awesome.
All right, great.
So, Harp, I just want to get back into the domestic violence on a legal term of it. Mm-hmm. How many cases are you aware of during this time and prior? Like, do you get a lot of women that come in? Because a lot of women are just afraid to speak up.
It's so interesting that we're having this topic. And, I didn't have a lot of cases I dealt with personally, mm-hmm. in the unit that I was in. But ironically, I did get I went into my office on Wednesday, and I had a young lady say, I need to speak to you in private. So I went in the hallway, and she said, listen, one of my colleagues, one of my coworkers who sits next to me, had to leave her home with her 4 children. She said this time he didn't hit her, but he did grab her, and this is not the first, second, third, fourth time. So she moved to the Bronx. She's in the Bronx, staying in her sister's house, but that's not a comfortable situation. So I know, Harp, you help a lot of people in the community. Is there something you could do for her? And so that kind of, it hit me on so many different levels, because she also stipulated she didn't want the job to know. And one of the things with NYPD, we have resources even for officers that are going through stuff like this. But it just kind of shed more light on what some women go through and what they feel, as far as nowhere to turn, no one to go to, don't want to get the police involved for fear of retribution or anything like that. So it was just unfortunate that, again, we're having this topic, and we need to have more topics like this. But someone, on behalf of a victim, came to me, but didn't want to alert the authorities because of fear of, everything that could come back. And she rather had just said, I'm going to leave my apartment, leave that man there, and just run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough situation.
I think that we have to, can I add something?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, sure.
I think that also we have to remember that even though it is illegal, there are situations where the police do show up at the home. And when they are in a relationship, if they're married or, they're a couple, the police take a sort of hands-off stand. The laws have, they've gotten better, but that's still an issue when the rape occurs between a couple.
Right.
Yeah,
They don't listen as readily as they do a stranger.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Donna. I wasn't trying to cut you off, but what I was trying to say was, I do have a question about that. How the cops that are called. Sometimes this is not all, but I've heard of instances where the cops would come to a domestic dispute, and they would, and there may have been some physical altercation or whatever. Regardless, and they would tell one party, okay, go spend the night somewhere else, and they wouldn't arrest them. Now I believe, Hart, let me know where you're wrong. You have to take somebody down, right?
So, first things first, with anything, with the topic that we're talking about, you got to have a complainant victim. You got to have a CV. And there are instances, I tell you, this is one of the worst calls. Cops hate going to domestic violence calls because they don't know what to expect. If you see recently, about a month ago in Queens, there was a domestic violence situation, and when the cops arrived, the husband opened fire on the police as they arrived, and he lost his life in the process. So these are one of the calls that cops hate going to because of the potential dangerous situations that may exist, not because of not wanting to do paperwork or anything like that. But like I forestated, you got to have a complainant victim, and one of the things that they will do, and I'm not saying that each case is handled the same way or by the book or as we would like it to be handled, but what would normally happen in that situation, if you have the two officers responding, one would speak to the victim, one would speak to the potential perpetrator. And based on the information given from the victim, if the victim clearly states, well, nothing happened, I don't want to press charges, and there's no visible physical injuries, there are instances where they may say, you know what, well, maybe you guys need to separate for the evening, or if something else happens, call us back, or something of that nature, or tell someone to take a walk. If this complainant victim says nothing happened and they have visible physical injuries, then that officer has the right, even if the person says, I don't want to press charges, they do have the right to place that perpetrator under arrest.
And that's regardless of whether all right, okay.
Because it's physical injuries, yeah.
All right, so that person has to go down. You have to take them down. Okay. Yeah, because that changed in the last, I guess, 10 years, right? At one time, it was, like you said, someone has to want to press charges for you to take them down. So now that has changed. Okay. Do you think that this continues?
It's not.
No, I'm sorry.
Well,
go ahead. Who is it?
Yeah. No, it's not necessarily so much of a law change. It's more so of a practice, because each jurisdiction also governs how they run things. So it's one of those things. But in addition to the conversation, and I appreciate the way that Harp had framed it, that there's a CV or a complaining victim and a perpetrator, because it does not delineate or designate a gender who is a perpetrator or who can be a victim. Because just the same way that a lot of women may not come forward, there's a lot of men who won't come forward for many of the same reasons of reprisal, embarrassment, and a number of other things. And so I just want, for the shaping of the conversation, as those who may listen to this in perpetuity, to understand that there are men who can be victims of many of the same things, who can be, who can have scars or visible bruising, rather, or none, and subjected to some of the same, stigmas as far as coming forward.
Okay.
I just wanted to put that.
No, great. Harp, do you want to add to that?
It's funny because I thank you for sharing that, brother. Yeah, everything he said is right on, and if I share a personal experience, I was married, at an early age.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Stop.
I'm sorry.
So like I was about to say, I had a personal experience years ago. I got married to my ex-wife at an early age. I was about 19, 20 years old, and we went through a similar situation where I actually had to call the cops on her because she didn't want me to leave the house. And she stood in front of the door. And, to make a long story short, once I called the cops, where some men, are ashamed of doing something like that, I was called a P word. I was a B. How could I do something like that as a man, from her? But years later, as I matured, I felt like that was the right thing to do. And if I, God forbid, I don't think I would ever have to go through that again, but I remember dealing with that at that time and being looked down upon, from my wife at the time, from my ex-wife, as half of a man. Actually, that was the word she used, half a man, for calling the cops, because I wasn't allowed to leave the home. And it just makes me think back to, if I handled it differently, where would I be today? So I definitely can relate to, men that probably would not want to make that call or report it for fear of being looked upon in a certain light.
Wow.
Okay.
So I want to go back to Donna and Dory and just get a little bit about what your situation is, how it makes you feel, and why do you think this person is like that? What makes them be violent or verbally or mentally abusive towards you? Just explain a little bit about what you're going through, how it makes you feel, and the signs even before it happens physically.
I think that that's like a loaded question because you would have to in some cases you would have to get into how they were raised, their environment, just different things like that. So as far as emotional abuse is concerned, you have narcissistic personalities. It's a power trip for them. So if, when they get into a situation, they want to beat you down, talk down to you and make you feel like, you're less than, and you start to believe that after a while, if you're in that situation for a long period of time. I think power has a lot to do with it. And just, it's a cowardly act on all sides. Right. It's a cowardly act. And that's just you trying to show that you have control over the situation, man or woman. I like the way what Harp described, because I've seen that so many times over the years. Women know what button to push on a man to get him to react, and they do it. And then the man is the one that suffers, in the end, even though she's the abusive one, on the outside looking in, he's less than. But I think that all the way around, anybody that abuses another person is a bully and a coward.
Right. I agree. Dory, would you like to add?
The same
Dory, I'm sorry. Yeah. Dory, can you add a little bit? Unmute your phone, Dory. If you can, give a little bit.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi. Okay. So a lot of what Donna just said, I agree with. And it's really, gosh, I'm a little nervous. I'm sorry.
No worries. Take your time.
Michelle, you could help me through a little bit because I've shared so much with you, but it's definitely the emotional and the person that my spouse or whatever have you. He is definitely, in my opinion, he's a narcissist, and it's very, it's very traumatic.
It's tough.
When dealing with someone for years, you start to believe that you're the problem. They have you actually thinking that you're the one with the problem. So and then when there's children involved, it's even tougher because they affect the children as well. And it becomes a little bit hard trying to buffer the situation because you can not even reason with the person because all that person cares about is themselves. And it's just a really, it's not an easy situation to feel like you're always the problem and you're what's wrong. And to have somebody dislike you so much, it really, it's hard to live with.
So is this something you're going through? Is this something that you're going through now, that you've been going through?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry to hear that.
Oh, thank you. I have to take some responsibility for it in terms of, I know I could have made better decisions, but sometimes like once you're in it, it's like so hard to get out of it.
You know what, Doreen? I'm going to cut you off right there, girl. That ain't your problem.
Oh, I was about to do the same thing. I'm so sorry.
No.
I'm so sorry.
That's why she's here. That's why she's here, guys.
No, my
she needs
friend.
help.
No, my friend. Let me tell you something. That's on him. That has nothing to do with you. You made your choices out of love. You made your choices out of having a great heart, and you felt that he was the person that you should give your love to. He is the one that took the choice to be abusive to you. So never, ever, no, don't take that on yourself, girl. Don't. And you are so brave to even come on here to discuss that.
Yes.
So I'm not going to let you do that, one girl. That ain't got nothing to do with you. That's him.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I
it's like more inner issues.
To share with you guys. And it's, like I said, I won't take up too much time. It's just,
you take as much time as you like. I mean, I don't mean for you to air out anything personal or something that may jeopardize or, that could harm you or anyway. But the more you can speak on it and share it, the audience, there may be people out there, in the audience that may be going through the same thing. So,
afraid to speak up. So this is a big step for you, even speaking on this platform with us, and I appreciate you coming on. I know her struggle. She is taking steps for help. It's just taking time. Dory, I love her like a sister. She's one of my clients. She's very indecisive, but it's because of the situation. She has children. She has a lot tugging at her. She's a beautiful person, but when you're dealing with a narcissist, it can confuse you every day because the person flips a lot. They flip so much. And at the same time, she's trying to get herself together and then he'll flip. And then, it's just a confusing situation. So, there's help there for her. She's getting help and it's taking her a while, to get that help. And over the time, it's just getting worse. Harp, can you give any information out in reference to legalities, because she has children, she has a home. This is like a really tight situation for her. And fear is there. The fear is there, it's there. And anyone on here, if they can give any kind of advice, because she's in deep. She's in deep.
Well, I'll go first. I'm pretty sure the other panelists can chime in and have some ideas. New York City in general has resources, even through ACS. I know when people hear those 3 letters, they have a lot of fear that comes with it. But one of the things that and I've dealt with them, and we spoke about it on this show before. I've dealt with ACS directly, and one of the things that they're in the business of keeping families together, not breaking them apart. And a lot of people don't believe it based off of what you see in the media and stuff like that. But they also have services for women that are in situations like this when it comes to emergency housing. And I'm not talking about a waiting list. I'm talking about within 24 hours, if that is something that someone was looking to do. Emergency housing, and sometimes not even in the same borough. It's sometimes it's a lot for someone to take that step and say, you know what, I'll go to a shelter. So it's totally up to the person that's going through it. But those are some of the options that are immediately available to anyone that's going through something like that, especially in New York City.
So what if the person doesn't want to leave their home and they want that person out, like without it? How do they go about getting the person out of their situation?
The typical, you've heard these situations before, order of protection, which sometimes that is a process. Order of protection, emergency, temporary order, restraining orders. But at the same time, to be honest with you, a restraining order, orders of protection, legally, they are supposed to protect you, but physically, I cannot sit here and lie and say you're 100% protected with that piece of paper.
Right.
And then
they ignore it anyway.
And then that's the problem. Then the person becomes angry when you try to take steps to protect yourself, and then so it is a scary situation, especially when you're the partner that, like, on paper you have a lot to lose, or when you feel like you have a lot to lose, like my pension, my house, like things like that. So I'm sorry for cutting in. I just
no, you're right, and I totally understand. But it's I tell you one thing: when you fighting for your life, it's fight in every sense of the word. It's a fight.
Right.
It's a fight for your life, fight for your children's life, a fight for everything that you love and stand for, a fight for yourself, and that's what it would take. This is no easy way out of this. If you were in the ring, there's no way you could just turn around and walk away from that opponent. You have to go through them, and this is the same as this situation. It's a fight, and my prayers are with you and your family at this time.
Thank you.
Yeah,
appreciate
that. Appreciate that, Hawk. Really, yeah. It's tough, like she said, she has a lot involved, a lot at stake, and the person threatens her, makes her feel like it's his too, so basically you need legal counsel, that someone that definitely is an expert in domestic abuse. I believe I gave you something before, yes. Dory. I did give you a lawyer's number, so we could follow up with that. And just you talking today, opening yourself up is a step. It's definitely a step. And
a big step.
Yeah, it's definitely a step, So having a narcissist in your life is just not you. They've had issues before you came into the picture. You just didn't know about it. You really don't know someone 100%. But when you have children involved, what you have to think about, what you do, we've talked about it before, is that narcissist is not only damaging you, he's damaging your children.
Yes.
Because they see it. They see it, and they're also being trained on what a man is supposed to, a fear of a man. Like, this is what they're going to think, when they're old enough to start dating, they may have, it's going to affect them. It's going to affect them because they're going to have trust issues. This is supposed to be their protector, their father, their daddy. Someone that loves them is going to take care of them, treat them like princesses that they are. And at the same time, they're treating their mom like shit. So it the next generation as well.
I wanted to add something. I'm sorry,
unfortunately.
Michelle.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, Michelle. I didn't mean to cut you off. What I want to say is that I know myself personally, was in a situation for many years. And because I wasn't being physically abused, I didn't feel that I was being abused. So it took many, many years for me to say, well, wait a minute, this ain't right. This is not the way that I'm supposed to be treated. And I can honestly tell you that it wasn't until last year that I finally got the courage to cut that situation and shut it down completely. So we have to remember that some of us don't know what abuse looks like in other forms.
Right.
And then when you're in love with somebody, you're in a situation, you love somebody. Of course, we all think that we can change that person. We want to stay together for the sake of our children. I know I grew up in a single parent home. So I stayed because, on the outside looking in, my kids had two parents. So you think about it that way. There's just there's so many features to an abusive situation that we don't always pinpoint exactly what an abusive situation is. So we have to start getting Dory. If you call the domestic abuse hotline, they will explain the different forms of abuse to you, and just do research. But it takes on so many different forms.
Okay.
Right. Definitely.
Okay.
I wanted
Ernest wanted to say something. Yeah. Go ahead, Ernest.
Yeah, one, I definitely want to send my love, prayer, uplift to Dory, as well as to Dee Dee, and anyone else that's out there. What I wanted to kind of to also frame for any of the listeners too is that sometimes the choice to stay has been stripped away due to the fact that someone is presenting a false presentation of themselves, and that goes into the whole thing of narcissism. But I think that whereas everyone tried to cut Dory off from trying to say that she had to accept responsibility for the choices that she made, is that that the choice was stripped away from you, and many people have been the choice of staying or leaving has been stripped away from them as well. And so I don't want anyone to feel like you have a you may not have you have a choice. Your choice is you need to follow legal guidelines. Make sure you get a lawyer. Seek legal advice. There are free ways of being able to do that. Get with a strengthen your community, your village of individuals that can talk with you about some of these issues that you're going through. Sometimes it's good to talk with people who've been through it. Sometimes it's good to talk to people who haven't. So that way you're not getting, you have a good, you get a balance of situations. Because some people are just so bitter saying, hey, well, do this and do that and do that. And it's not always the best, thing to act off of emotion. But make sure you get strengthened. If you need to go back to a higher attachment to a higher belief, to get grounded again. I don't know what you may believe in or what you don't believe in, but always have a belief in something until you're able to truly believe in yourself. Understand that you are a reflection of God. And I hope that everyone who's listening or going through something similar to this can find strength in Dory being able to make this type of step, and take the necessary steps to being able to protect themselves moving forward.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Ernest. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Monique, I want to address something with Monique because she worked in New York City Housing Authority. She also worked with an organization giving scholarships to young ladies, but she worked with a lot of women. Like, have you ever experienced or know of anyone that's been in a situation? And if you have, can you give some of your expertise on it if you can?
Yes. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to start with some personal stories. Domestic abuse has been in my family for generations. My grandmother passed away. Well, she was murdered by her son-in-law, who abused his wife, who was my maternal aunt. And so I never knew my grandmother. And my uncle, who was my maternal uncle, my mother's brother, was murdered by his wife, who abused her. And so, domestic abuse has been in my family. And I witnessed my mother's boyfriend of 9 years when I was growing up attempt to abuse her. But being the woman that my mother was, she ended up beating him up and would not allow him to beat on her. And she ended the relationship. And he was a boxer. So I guess he was not very
Wow.
good because she really put a hurting on him. And so I've seen this growing up, during my life. And I don't know that it affected me, but I do know that growing up, that I would not allow a man to treat me how, I witnessed, men treating the women in my family. And, like the panelists said, it's financial, it's emotional, it's physical, it's psychological, it's verbal, it's mental, it's sexual abuse. I mean, it just runs the gamut. And any way that an abuser, whether a man or a woman, can abuse their partner, it's horrific and horrifying, and it has, everlasting effects on partners and their children and their families, because people that try to help them will often, get pushed aside. I tried to help my sister when she was having a fight with her partner, and I ended up getting pushed to the ground, and they ended up staying together. So you have to be really careful, how you intervene, when you intervene, so forth and so on. But yeah, I've seen uh, a lot of domestic violence cases, especially with the New York City Housing Authority. And you give the information, whatever information you have, domestic violence hotline, and there were just so many outlets. I mean, I kept pamphlets in my office, and I would give them to everybody just in case people didn't want to speak. So I would just give them the pamphlets and let them know that these organizations were there for them. And in cases of partners being together and splitting up, and who's going to get the apartment, and it was difficult. We had what we call bifurcation. If, say, for instance, a man and a woman was in a verbally abusive or physically abusive relationship, and either partner was arrested and couldn't come back to the home, we will do what we call a bifurcation, especially if there was what do you call I'm having a brain freeze right now. In any case, in order protection, well, if the courts found against the whatever partner, we would do what we call a bifurcation of lease. So we would award that apartment to the person who the court
gave the order of protection on?
Yeah, who the court had the order of protection for. So the other partner, the other person would not be able to retain the apartment, right?
Right.
So they would, but they would be able to, depending on the outcome of the court, they would be able to file for their own apartment. So that's, there was just so many horror stories, but it's a matter of resources, just getting the information out, and sometimes just not pushing too hard, because sometimes people are not ready to hear the information, but just to know that it's available for them. I can't mute my iPad, sorry. Shh. Just knowing the information is there for them sometimes is the beginning of what they need to get out of that relationship.
Yeah, that's true.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely hard. Step one is always the biggest step.
Yeah.
Definitely. Okay. So Donna, you have any more to fill in, or on
I
that
got more
side
questions that I do want to cover.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
Is domestic violence primarily a woman issue?
No, not at all.
Not at all.
People don't think about this, but when women use their children against their partner, that's a form of abuse. And that happens so often. I guess maybe some people don't think about it that way. They think about it as revenge or jealousy or whatever. But when you hold your children against your partner and not seeing them because you're not together anymore, that's abuse.
Most definitely.
No, I agree. I agree with that. And I've heard a lot of instances of people going through divorce, and the woman is holding the children,
right,
as like hostages, or especially with
Right.
visitation.
Yeah.
And that's something that I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, that's abuse. That is
Yeah.
abuse
Yeah.
for both whoever the spouse is and the children.
Yeah.
right.
I don't think
right.
that's covered enough in workshops or information regarding abusive situations.
Hey, Greg, what do you have to say about that? Because that's something I really never thought about. But Dee,
Yeah, I think that we do have to. I like that example that you just gave.
yeah,
I was thinking that earlier about how abusive that is to hold your children, or how
Right.
abusive it is to um, push those buttons and then wait to see if he's going to strike back. That's abusive. Like Harper was
Right.
talking about his situation, taunting him and calling him names. That's abuse. So I think
Right.
that both sides can definitely be the victim of abuse. And we need to talk about it more because men are scared to come forward and they're ashamed to
Right.
come forward. And I think the
They
more we
are.
talk
It's
about it,
embarrassing. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think we need to talk about it
Definitely.
more and make it more visible.
okay.
So,
Do you?
Right.
hey, well,
Yeah, Go ahead, Ernest.
yeah. So I think that also kind of ties into one, some of the causes of physical abuse as it pertains to kind of this jockeying and leveraging of one another, right? So you alluded to earlier about codifying marital rape, right? But sex can also be used as a tool against another spouse, right?
Right.
The same way as standing in front of the door, holding their children, or whatever have you, as it pertains to abuse another person. So just the term itself, I think, is one that we I think have to be able to understand. But then how those things then spawn into the actual physical domestic violence itself. And it's again not to sit there and place blame on any particular person on the place. I mean, as we're talking about men being abused, or there's not being just a case or situation where just women are subjected to it, but how those things are done, and then what leads into the actual case of physical violence. So I think that talking about those things, like how do you subvert that? How do you avoid someone using their children against them, or sex, or money, or any other type of or negligence, or just being neglected in the emotionally within the confines of the relationship? How do you talk about those things as it pertains to the or adding to the angst within the overall relationship?
Right.
I know. I heard Dora mention something about the pensions or monies.
Right.
And one of the reasons she's having such a difficult time of cutting the cord, for lack of a better term. But a lot of women are in that situation where they're being abused. If it wasn't for financial reasons, they would just leave. But a lot of women stay because of the insecurity of not being in that situation. So, Greg, are you there?
Yeah, definitely.
I haven't heard from Greg, but Ernest,
Can you hear me?
Want to say something? Yeah, I can hear
Right.
you. You want to contribute to this?
Yeah, they I mean, it's definitely, that's something else, you can use as a tool as an abuse. It is finances, sex, whatever you can use to your advantage to to gain an advantage in a situation where there's a lot of other levels to what pushed you there in the first place. Like what pushed you to use this as a weapon. Like whatever you're going to use as a weapon against a partner is potentially abusive, and it's wrong. We got to get to the core of what pushed you to that point in the first place. Again, not assigning any right or wrong, but it's wrong wherever it's coming from.
Okay,
that's true. I know I can speak on it a little bit. Go ahead, Ernest. I'll speak after you.
Oh no, ma'am. No, I defer.
Yeah, go ahead,
Okay,
Michelle.
no, I was just gonna say a little bit. My mother was like that. My father was a great father, but he was a horrible husband. My mother had 8 children. She didn't work the first, for a lot of years. And my father used the fact that he was the financial breadwinner. He had to be in control of everything. At that time, I didn't realize how much of a narcissist my father was with trying to control my mom. And when the last child was born, she had 8 children. She got a job because she's like, it's not enough money for this family. He didn't like it. He was an alcoholic as well. So alcoholism takes its toll with a lot of domestic abuse relationships. My mother would always say, "I have 8 children. Where am I going with 8 children?" Financially, she had to stay, but on the upside of it, I mean, I guess it's not an upside. It's not a good thing. It was verbal abuse most of the time, my dad. And when it was physical, my mother used to beat the crap out of him, you know, and it was just, we saw it. We would sit in rooms, a lot of my siblings were younger than me, but we would all be in the room. We could hear it. We could hear them arguing and fighting. And my mother always said, why would I leave? I have 8 children. But then when the kids got to a certain age, she didn't leave because she stayed after being with a person for over 30 years. She's like, okay, the kids are grown. It becomes a financial thing. She stayed for financial reasons, and as they got older, it changed. The abuse wasn't there, but the verbal abuse was. So she chose to stay. She sacrificed herself for her children. And most women, that's what we do. We sacrifice ourselves because of our children. If you're weak, you're beat down so bad that you don't think you have another choice. My mother was a little stronger in some ways with getting a job, getting some independence, and it kind of, the abuse leveled up, lowered down a little bit because my mother became much more verbal. Um, and I think the last time my father was verbally or physically abusive with my mom was when my nephew was born, and he was screaming at the grandchild. And my mother was like, "That's it. You're not going to do this to another generation." So every situation is different, but financial, yeah, it has a lot to do with it. Has a lot to do with it. But on Dory's behalf, the financial is not on the spouse's side; it's on her side, and she's afraid of losing. Harp just asked a question as a child of a victim. Did that affect the way I raised my child? It did. It did. That's why I didn't want a lot of children. I had one child. I didn't want to. My ex was not. He was mentally abusive, and I chose to leave. I was like, listen, if it's a mental thing, it's going to be physical next, and then I'm gonna have to kill you. So I'm not doing time for any man to kill him for putting his hands on me. I just chose not to be in a situation where I was getting mental abuse, and I knew from there, being watching my mother, that mental abuse can graduate to physical, and I chose not to do that, and that's just my choice. So.
All right.
Yeah.
Now I want to bring in COVID to the equation. All right. Now I've seen stats to the fact that domestic abuse has risen substantially since people have been in lockdown. So I'm gonna address this to Harp. Harp, are you seeing a lot of traffic around abuse? I mean, you may not be in that department that does that, but are you hearing from your colleagues that the rate has gone up, and And another question I have is it, and I hate to throw race in anything, but are you seeing it more coming from the minority neighborhood versus the white neighborhood? Or are they just the same? Or y'all guys just don't keep the stats?
There are stats that they don't keep as far as uh, uh, racial stats and stuff like that. But there is stats as it relates to domestic violence and abuse, and you can see if you took the time. We do year to date stats, we do week to week, and you do see a difference with COVID-19. Um, as far as people being locked in with each other. Some people who were in the process of leaving and may have had a court appointments. COVID has affected that with some with some families and some couples. And then we've had instances and cases where people decide, what, well, I'm just going to take my chances and just leave anyway. Forget about the court date I had, and I'll take my chances in the shelter or out in the streets. So, but yes, there has been, with everything, COVID has affected a lot, and there are couples who were maybe on the verge of separating, ended up staying together because of COVID-19 and the quarantine and the lockdowns.
Okay. Anybody on that?
Oh,
COVID has impacted the relationships of people having to be together day in, day out.
I think that that the based upon what Harp had said, that the statistical data is going to come out next year. When you're talking about
Right.
doing something from year to date and being able to capture something, you're not going to be able to capture necessarily everything that happened in 2020 and the effects of it up until probably this year is where that information is going to come out. So it's going to be something that's going to be determined. I would also add though, anecdotally, that the reporting or lack of reporting will probably be exacerbated by COVID-19 because of the fact that you can't get a court date readily. You can't just up and move up into another apartment. Many people have lost their jobs. And so not only to the fact that you have COVID restrictions, but you have residual effects as far as finances and security itself. And so now, whereas I would have said something, I have to tolerate it a little bit more because now the moratorium on evictions have been extended, and so that's been an issue, and as well as many other different things. So I think that the damage won't be fully assessed until sometime later this year, as far as what happened last year. But then within the next couple of years, as far as seeing what domestic violence or people that have been affected by um, domestic violence and COVID combined.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Greg.
And I just want to,
Yeah, go ahead,
Gregory, are
I
you
just
there?
wanted to add something.
Oh,
I just wanted
who's
to
it?
add as
I'm sorry.
Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Donna.
on the mental health side. Now that we're in a pandemic and we're in quarantine, a lot of people are losing their jobs, so they can't afford to get um, therapy, or you can't go
Right.
to marriage counseling. You can't do any of those things. Number one, financially, people have lost their jobs, so they can't afford it. Number two, the services are few and far between because we can't do in person therapy as much as we used to before. So if you're in a situation where your therapist was helping you get out of that situation, abusive situation, you may not be able to do that now because you can't get therapy or you can't get counseling. So that's another reason why the numbers are so high. Number two, I worked on the hotline, and actually I got a call yesterday about someone who is their mental illnesses has taken an upswing because of the pandemic. So we have to remember that there's more to it now that the pandemic is, they're inside, they're on top of each other 24 hours a day, and then there may be someone that had a mental illness and that is on the upswing, so they're going to start to abuse the people that are around them that are closest to them.
I wanted to ask you, Donna, and I was going to come to you, is that, people are losing their livelihoods. They worked all their lives. They had jobs and they've been able to raise their family. Now all of that's been taken away from them and they're stuck in their house. And certain people may express, the frustration where they're at the end of the line, they're borderline suicidal and this and that. They may express that anger or that emotion, and it may manifest itself in domestic violence. Don't you think that plays a role?
Yeah, I think that it all does. I think that it all does. Um, if I say, let me share something personal. Now I go to therapy every week. So before COVID, I would go to therapy, and if I had a rough therapy session, I would go to Starbucks afterwards and get a cup of coffee, or I would go to the mall and walk around. Now that we're in a pandemic, I can't do those things anymore. So I'm going to come home, and whoever is in my house, they're going to feel the brunt of my horrible therapy session. And so that was, my freedom was taken away in a sense, or my coping mechanism was taken away. So I have to take it out on whoever's closest to me. So it all ties in together.
Okay.
I think, Walt, one of the other things that, tie into what you just said is because I had the opportunity to do some media for a women's domestic violence um, forum at my church. And one of the startling things I found out I didn't give any thought to is that because everybody's in the house, that skewed the domestic violence reporting numbers. A police officer said the calls were dropping and they couldn't understand why, is because now, if one spouse was going out to work or they were both going out to work and they were in an abusive situation, that opened up a window for one spouse to be able to report it, get out of the situation, wait for the other spouse to go to work. But now that they're in a situation where both spouses are constantly around each other, they're afraid that one of the spouses that are in a bad situation might not report it because that other spouse is all over their shoulder. And this was kind of changing those numbers somewhat. They were concerned that might have an impact on the numbers because now there's no release. There's no out, for the spouse that's being abused.
Right. And that, from what I've read is that certain people, like, you ever heard that term? You don't know a person till you live with them. So you got these couples that have been married for like 5 years, and they both have their careers, they work, and now they're both in the same house all the time.
Mm.
All right. So domestic violence could be a byproduct of knowing this person. This person may have been deep down inside a domestic or an abuser or a narcissist is the term that Dee used, that Donna used. I think that is coming out, and I'm only thinking, but have you seen anything to that effect?
Because now these people are really getting to know each other.
Right. It's just, exactly. You never know a person until you live with them.
That's facts.
That's why a lot of
That's right.
a lot of, if you see, well, I don't know, but like, there are signs now. They have like, if you call call a pizza shop, and you say a certain, I want a pepperoni pizza, then that person is on alert that that's a domestic violence situation. Or if you call the hotline, while the abusive spouse is there are code words that you can give to let them know that you're calling about a certain situation. That we've had to add all of these things to the mix now, that we're, like Greg said, you're home with this person, and you can't readily call, the hotlines and say, well, I'm being abused. But now, and I don't have the exact names and numbers, but if you do call certain hotlines, there are code words that you can use now to let them know that you're in a situation that you need to get out of.
Well, how would we go about getting the information for that, so that maybe we could put it in our show notes for next week?
Well,
If you, I
Donna
gave
sent me
Michelle
something.
yesterday.
Yeah.
I did. If you go on the website for the National Domestic Abuse Hotline, they will give you information. The crisis text line. Now, the crisis text line is usually just for people that are struggling with their mental illnesses. But if you call the crisis text line and let them know, or you can text 741-741, and let them know that your mental health is suffering because of an abusive situation, they can give you some feedback. There are many organizations where you could just Google it and get the information. If you can't, or you're afraid, reach out to a friend. I had someone contact me yesterday that they could not get the information themselves, so I got it for them and provided it. So reach out to other people and try to Instagram, Facebook. These are all great platforms to get more information for domestic violence.
Okay. All right. Hart, are you still there?
Awesome.
I see you.
Yeah, he's in the chat room giving information.
Yeah.
That's great, Hart. Thank you.
Great, Hart.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, I hate to
Thanks,
take you
Hart.
away from that, but we really appreciate it. But I got a question along the lines of what I just asked Donna. Are y'all guys informing your officers that go out on patrol on domestic calls that a lot of these people are really good people, but they're out of work for the first time in 20 years, which is no excuse, don't get me wrong. But do y'all guys put that in there? I mean, do you inform your officers on how to approach a situation like that? That they have to take that into account?
That's a great question. My colleagues and who work directly in my unit, we do talk about that among other things. I mentioned it in the chat section about emotional intelligence, and I mentioned it on a previous show. This is something that I'm training my fellow officers in currently, and I think that's what it boils down to. Having empathy, and when you're going on these calls, not handling every call the same way, and kind of leading with that, and not just domestic violence, but leading with that first. Now, there are some instances where, that, it's not an excuse. There are some instances where, right is right, wrong is wrong. You see the crime right there as it is, and you don't say, well, this person has been out of work for this long, so they stabbed this person, or no, we don't do it like that. But as it relates to some calls that we get, I do tell the guys that I work with, and we're trying to extend that training to the whole department. Thankfully, we actually had a meeting last week with the police commissioner, Commissioner Shea, and talks about taking our program to the police academy for new officers to be trained in emotional intelligence and using empathy, and not just going off the first notion, or pulling out the handcuffs, pulling out the gun, pulling out the taser, but leading with empathy. So yeah, that is something that we discuss in our unit.
Excellent. Okay, and my final question was such, when I was writing the question up for y'all guys, I guess I was a little naive when I got to this last question here. All right, and it says, what would you recommend on how to stop domestic violence once and for all? Is there some silver bullet that y'all guys would recommend or suggest or implement that would just stop domestic violence? Or is that just, it's a moving target? It's been there for years and years and years, and it's going to be here for years and years and years. I mean, have y'all guys concluded as much? And this could be to anybody who wants to respond.
You can't stop it.
I think sometimes that's one of the traps we might fall into, is looking for that magic bullet approach, where this is, it's much more, it's much deeper than that. It's much more multifaceted than that. Then we can just look at one, and that's the same as with anything else. Looking for that magic bullet is definitely going to lead us into a rabbit hole.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, this Ernest. I think that when we address anything, we have to look at the root of it. So, same way we had a discussion last year about gun violence, and obviously now we're talking about domestic violence. But in order to being able to
Right.
stop either one of them, you have to be able to stop violence. The act of someone wanting to be violent or malicious towards another person. And that's the issue of how do we address that? The need or want or desire to want to being violent towards another person. How do we stop that? And if we're able to address the larger issue, then we can definitely address all of the subsets. But this is a subset of a larger issue of why, as a society, that we are so violent. And there are some scientific notions that are reflected in other forms of life, as far as animals and things of that nature, where violence is a part of life in some particular state fashions. So I don't know whether or not if it can ever be quelled all together, or not. But I think that if we strive to being able to look at some of those, look at the symptoms and then look at the causes, maybe we might be able to at least mitigate most of the violence altogether. So, but that's just
Okay.
a thought anecdotally.
All right. Now, yeah, I have
Yeah.
this crazy, and Donna, you can chime in on this. I have this crazy idea that it may be genetic. So let's say you take the paternal side of the family, or you take the men born within a family over, let's say, 100 years, and the males being married. All right. Do you think that characteristic is passed down through genetics? All right. The propensity to hit a woman or to be violent towards a woman. You think that it could be genetic?
I think that just like alcoholism is genetic, um, mental illness is genetic, different things like that. I think it could be, but I
Right.
think that it also stems from what we see. Um, you know,
Yeah.
There's a trigger. So
Greg is
yeah,
on
like
here,
in
so
anything,
you
like right. If you're an alcoholic, I mean, if you're predisposed to be an alcoholic, it's genetic and it's in your genes. If you don't drink alcohol,
exactly.
you never have a problem. But once you touch it, then you have the problem.
And
It's
alcoholism and
it's
domestic
yeah.
violence go hand in hand.
Right.
So,
Right. Right.
that's how genetics would play into it. But if you see, if you're growing up and that's all you see, then that's gonna
Right.
determine whether you become abusive or not, or
Right.
how you are treated by your parents. That can contribute to
Hmm.
how you react in abusive situations. So I think that it all ties in together.
I got
Yeah.
another
I
question
agree.
before I turn it over to Michelle. Is the racism that people have been suffering for for over 400 years, especially in the workplace, and then seeing it on a day-to-day basis, of living that part of being a minority, or living as a minority in this country. Do you think that plays a role in domestic abuse?
Um, I want to say that I always say this. Um, we are minority families are always the ones that say what goes on in this house stays in this house. So we are reluctant
Right.
to divulge what's going on, abusive situations that are going on in our house. And it could
Mm.
be because of pride. It could be because, like, I think it was Harper that said if you go to ACS, it's a fear of losing your children, losing your family. There are different scenarios that play into why we keep those things in house. And so I think going forward, we have to, I always say, live out loud. We have to start speaking out loud about what's really going on in our households in order to for it to become normal. And I say that in quotes because once it becomes normal, then that takes away the stigma and more of us will reach out and get help. So I think that
Okay.
in our minority households, like my grandfather, who was my heart and my soul, I never paid attention. He talked to my grandmother while I was growing up. It was always, well, that's just the way grandpa is. Just like Michelle said, she might not have paid attention to how um, Daddy Sweeney talked to his wife
Mm-hmm.
because that's just the way it is. But those aren't normal situations. Now that we're adults, we know that
Right.
those were abusive situations. And so we
Right.
have to start talking about that.
Yeah, just like when we grew up and we were getting whoopings, and when your mom used to go out there and get a switch, and if you get a small
Right,
one, I'm going out there and get one. And now it's
Right.
against the law. It's child abuse. So
right.
I'm not trying to equate that because I'm still stuck in the middle on corporal punishment. But yeah. It's a cultural thing too. I see here where Harp. Do you want to verbalize what you said in the chat room?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just, responding to the question in the comments about it being genetic or even, cultural. And, I used to think like that. I used to go to therapy about 3 years ago, and I had a fear of repeating some of the actions of my father. And not my
Wow.
father wasn't abusive. If anything, my father was more of he. I guess you could say he was a womanizer. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but he wound up dying alone, and I thought that would
Mm.
be my fate. And my therapist just plainly told me, "You don't have to be your father." And
Right.
so when that question was posed, I thought about that, and I thought that the effort that I took, I consciously made the effort that I'm not going to be my father in that aspect, and it took work, because it's easy to
Right.
do the wrong things and go left. But
Yeah.
I fought for my family, fought for my marriage, and again, it was a fight. It wasn't easy, but
Right.
coming out on the other side, I saw the benefit of it, and I saw something that I didn't want to be, and I made a conscious effort and chose
Right.
not to be that. So now I'm not saying I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a therapist, so I don't
Right.
know, if medically, a doctor would say yes, genetics have something to do with it, or
Right.
culturally. Well, I definitely wouldn't agree with culturally because this happens in all cultures. We
It
just hear
does.
about
It
it in ours the
does.
most because we live in it. But it's all over the spectrum.
But you know
But
what,
for
Harp?
me, I made that conscious effort.
Harp, you made that choice
Hmm.
though. Yeah, I was gonna say you picked up on the signs. You got help, and you made that choice to better yourself. Some people don't. They just keep making doing the same patterns. And Donna's right. It's the generational curses that they have to stop. You have to break it. Do you
Hmm.
want to be like
Well,
that person? You
what
know.
and Michelle, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a great point. I mean, that you're pointing out that Donna had pointed out that Harp is saying is because it's the
Mm-hmm.
predisposition. What Harp is in there saying is that it's a struggle. It's not easy to
Definitely.
sit there
Yeah.
to try to separate it, and it's a constant. It's a work probably day after day, week after week, month after month to being
Right.
able to stay on top of it. And then Donna's point was that again, culturally and
Mm-hmm.
potentially genetically. Again, I'm not a geneticist, but that being predisposed to it,
Mm-hmm.
alcoholism,
Mm-hmm.
abuse, or whatever have you, is something that can be kind of passed on as a trigger. Again, maybe something that happens within the end. Again, that's not my field of
Right.
study, but with everything that has happened to us as a people culturally from and again and oftentimes this is Black History Month, so even going back to slavery to talk about things that have
Right.
happened through Civil War and through the Jim Crow era and things that we have seen, the way that
Mm-hmm.
our grandparents raised our great grandparents raised our grandparents raised our parents, and the way that we are to this day. And even across this panel, there are different generations that have been raised in different eras and different regions of the
Mm-hmm.
country, and where there's still
Right.
certain things that culturally that we agree with that we would not do.
and things that culturally that we've seen that we've either in some ways turned a blind eye to it at one point in time in our life, and now have realized to the day that those things were wrong. But that's what happens
Right.
when you're predispositioned to something from a cultural standpoint.
Right.
Okay,
And
I agree.
also culturally, also I'd like to make a point with that as well. Dory, she's African American and her husband is from the DR, from DR. So that culturally wise is a big difference. A big difference.
Huge.
Yes,
And
Michelle,
when
that's
you
what I
have
was
to
speaking about. Yes. Sorry
yeah.
for cutting you off.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I
Yeah.
meant when I said
No,
culturally.
that's what she meant. Yeah. Culturally, when you're from two different backgrounds, there's always that challenge. Always that challenge.
Most definitely.
Okay,
Yeah.
all
I
right.
Yeah.
can give a small
Mm-hmm.
example of like
Mm-hmm.
making dinner. How, as
Mm-hmm.
African or Black people, African Americans, we might have a vegetable, a protein, and like a carb, rice or something.
Right.
And
Right.
he will be upset because he doesn't eat like string beans, for example. And he'll say like, "Oh, what is
Right.
this? This is not." So that's what I meant. I just wanted to share that. Why it does
Right.
affect us, unfortunately, because it's like
Okay.
Yeah.
everything. No matter what I do, it's wrong. So yeah,
Yeah, they're
thank you
looking
for
for.
listening.
It
Mm-hmm.
just takes a small thing to, become a big thing. It's in the
Right.
detail. Just like you said, he
Right.
doesn't like string beans, and he sees them on the plate. He's like, what is this? You know, and
Mm-hmm.
as
Mm-hmm.
and it's cultural. I mean, that's something to overcome in itself. I mean, we can do a show on marrying people from other countries. I mean, my wife is from Africa. All right, so we come, and I'm from North Carolina, so you can imagine we got two different cultures, but we've been together a long time. Okay,
Right.
so that's a show in itself. But we're pushing up against the clock. But I do,
Yes.
want to thank Dora and wish her the best of
Dory.
luck, and God bless you. We'll be praying for you, and you will overcome. Even though, I don't like the song "We Shall Overcome." I think that we shall do something. Okay, but I wish you the best, and I know it will work out for you. Just stay strong. All right, and I also want to say I want people to listen, follow, and share the Want Weekly podcast. And this episode will be out Sunday afternoon around 4 p.m. across all podcast platforms. For example, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, of course, Podbeam, which you're already on. All right, you just got to follow.
Right.
Okay. So, and iHeartRadio. So wherever you get your podcast, that's where we will be. And I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. And, my panel, I love y'all guys. And I appreciate y'all guys being here for us. But let me turn it over to Michelle. All right. Thank you. And
Yes.
y'all guys have
Thank
a
you,
good week.
Walter. Thank you. This was a very ooh, I love the show. I appreciate you all for your input as always. You guys bring so much to the table. I thank you, Donna, for being on our guest, a repeat guest. Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
thank you, Dory, for taking a step to join us and joining the Walk Weekly family on our Friday Live and speaking your truth. I know that had to be hard for you, but we appreciate you. We are here. The Walk Weekly family is always here for you if you need any help. You see, we had a NYPD. We have different people from different backgrounds, and we just appreciate and love you, and we wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate you. Thank you, Hart. Greg, Ernest, we appreciate you. Monique, we appreciate you, even though she's off. And we appreciate our audience. Thank you for joining us on our weekly Friday Live. You all have a blessed weekend. Be safe and take care and know that somebody loves you.